I don't think I've ever told this story, but my friend was videotaping, and I started talking to him about her. And then I was done. And I was literally done then. I talked for about 10, 15 minutes, so I don't know where that footage is.
For decades, Kevin Costner kept one deeply personal truth locked away. Something that never made headlines, never fueled gossip, and was never meant for public drama. But the moment it surfaced, left the world stunned. When the music icon Whitney Houston passed away, many were surprised to see Costner step forward at her funeral to deliver a heartfelt eulogy. Rumors had long swirled about the real nature of their bond, but instead of feeding speculation, Costner chose honesty. He spoke not as a Hollywood star, but as someone profoundly changed by her presence, her struggles, and her kindness. Now, at 69, Kevin Costner finally opens up about the one truth he hid for decades: a quiet, emotional connection that shaped him in ways the public never saw, and a story far more powerful than any rumor ever told. But before we begin, if you're a fan of Kevin Costner or love old Western movies, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share amazing stories about Western stars and classic Hollywood icons. When people think of Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston together, one film rises instantly above all others: The Bodyguard. Released in 1992, it became one of the most iconic romantic dramas of its era and marked the first time the two stars shared the screen. What made their pairing even more extraordinary was a simple truth few people knew. The Bodyguard was never supposed to belong to either of them. The script had lived a long, frustrating life in Hollywood. Originally imagined with Diana Ross and Steve McQueen in the lead roles, it was rejected again and again, an astonishing 67 times, before it finally landed in Kevin Costner's hands. At that point, Costner was still far from the powerhouse name he would soon become. But everything changed when Dances with Wolves turned him into a certified Hollywood star. With his newfound influence, Costner personally revived The Bodyguard, pushing the project forward and refusing to let it fade away once more. Yet he had one firm condition. If the film was going to be made, he wanted Whitney Houston as his co-star. That decision, however, was anything but simple. Whitney was already dominating the music world, and while she had considered acting, jumping straight into such a massive role terrified her. She later admitted she feared public judgment, that critics would tear her apart before giving her a fair chance. Deep down, she worried she wasn't ready, that she might embarrass herself on screen. Everything changed with a phone call. Costner personally reached out to her, not as a producer or a star flexing his power, but as someone who genuinely believed in her. That vote of confidence finally persuaded Whitney to say yes. Even then, the road ahead was far from smooth. Other obstacles still loomed, but one thing was now certain. A collaboration that rarely happened was slowly transforming into cinematic history. For Whitney Houston, The Bodyguard was not just another project. It was a leap into the unknown. She had never acted before, and suddenly she was being asked to lead a major Hollywood film opposite an established star. The pressure was immense. There was no gentle introduction, no smaller role to ease her in. This was a global spotlight, and she knew it. There was another anxiety that few openly discussed at the time. Whitney was a black woman stepping into a role that Hollywood had not traditionally imagined that way. While the industry had changed on the surface, quiet skepticism still lingered. Raised eyebrows, unspoken doubts, and coded resistance hovered in the background. Kevin Costner saw none of that. To him, she was simply right for the part, and he stood by her with unwavering confidence, encouraging her at every turn. Still, the studio demanded proof. Before Whitney could be cast, she had to pass a screen test. Costner couldn't shield her from that reality. And so, what should have been a routine industry step became the most daunting moment of her young acting life. Years later, at her funeral, Costner would return to that day with heartbreaking clarity. He remembered seeing her alone in her trailer, questioning herself. The woman who filled stadiums and ruled the charts looked fragile, almost lost. She picked herself apart, finding fault in everything: her voice, her presence, her ability, unable to hear reassurance even when it was offered with sincerity. To him, it felt like watching someone who had conquered the world suddenly feel very, very small. For a moment, Costner admitted he was tempted to intervene completely. He didn't care how the test went. In his mind, she could have stumbled, failed spectacularly, even done something wildly unexpected, and he would have defended it as brilliance. He would have found a way. But he stopped himself, knowing that protecting her that way would rob her, and everyone else, of something honest and deserved. Before stepping onto the set, Whitney asked to be alone for a few minutes. Those few minutes stretched longer than expected. When she finally appeared, the test had to be halted almost immediately. During that brief absence, she had reapplied her makeup heavily, convinced she didn't look good enough. Under the harsh studio lights, it melted away, leaving her visibly shaken and painfully self-conscious. When Costner gently asked why, she answered quietly. She just wanted to be perfect. That was the moment he truly understood her. Not as a superstar, not as an icon, but as a woman carrying the crushing weight of expectation. Her fame wasn't armor. It was a burden. She wanted this desperately. She wanted to be worthy of the chance. And in that fragile, human moment, he saw how deeply she gave of herself, pouring everything she had into trying to be enough. The Bodyguard went on to exceed every expectation, becoming a global phenomenon that earned nearly $500 million worldwide. Yet for Kevin Costner, the film's success was never about numbers or box office records. In his heart, the magic belonged entirely to Whitney Houston. Years later, standing before a grieving crowd at her funeral, Costner spoke to her as if she could still hear him. He said she had been more than good enough. She had been extraordinary. He reminded her that she carried the film on her own, that her voice filled the screen even in silence, that she didn't just appear in the story, she defined it. He admitted that countless actors could have stepped into his role without much consequence. But Whitney? He believed without hesitation that she was the only person alive who could have brought Rachel Marron to life at that moment in time. For most audiences, her soaring performance of I Will Always Love You remains the emotional core of the film. Timeless, haunting, unforgettable. What many never realized is that the song was rarely part of the movie at all. Before Whitney joined the project, another track had been planned, one that spoke of heartbreak and loss in a quieter way. But when she came aboard, everything shifted. Her presence changed the soul of the film, and with it, the music. Beyond the cameras and the applause, Whitney Houston and Kevin Costner shared something far more intimate, a quiet bond rooted in their upbringing in the Baptist church. It was a shared language of memories and rituals that few others could fully understand. In his eulogy, Costner spoke tenderly about how they would sit together, trading stories from their childhoods, laughing at moments only someone raised in those pews could appreciate. The church, for them, wasn't just faith. It was a private space of recognition, familiarity, and comfort. Costner reminisced about his own early days there, recalling mischievous moments that now felt almost sacred in their innocence. passing notes during sermons, whispering when silence was expected, slipping into the church kitchen after communion. He remembered standing with empty glasses, pretending to sip whiskey while chatting with imaginary friends, only to be caught and dragged away by his father. Whitney, he said, loved these stories, especially the image of a young boy repeatedly pulled back into line. Those memories made her laugh, not because they were grand, but because they were human. When Whitney passed away on February 12th, Costner broke his silence with a single, devastating sentence shared publicly. "She was my one true love." Later, in an interview, he tried to explain what those words truly meant. He spoke of the letters he had written to her during her struggles, letters filled with concern, care, and a deep desire to help. Writing had never come easily to him, but for Whitney, he tried again and again. He hoped his words might reach her in some way, might convince her to ask for help, or at least remind her that she was not alone. Those letters were never answered. Costner never knew if she read them, or if they were lost somewhere along the way. That uncertainty stayed with him. In his eulogy, he returned again and again to one painful truth. What hurt him most was not her fame or her fall, but the way she constantly doubted herself. She questioned her worth, her talent, her right to stand where she stood, despite being, in his eyes, unmistakably gifted. To him, Whitney was not simply successful. She was a moment, a force, an unrepeatable phenomenon. Even her smallest performances felt special because they belonged only to her. He said she had set the bar so high that even seasoned professionals hesitated to sing her songs. Why attempt the impossible? The only ones who still dared, he observed, were young girls, dreamers, who sang her music not to compete, but to imagine becoming something greater. Costner hoped those girls would understand something Whitney herself struggled to believe: that believing in oneself mattered more than anything else. As his farewell drew to a close, his voice faltered. He spoke of her now standing somewhere beyond this world, singing again, this time before God Himself. He imagined heaven pausing in awe, even the divine, wondering how something so perfect had ever been created. Through tears, he urged her one last time not to doubt herself. And then came his final words, soft, trembling, full of love. "Don't worry," he told her. "You'll be good enough." Now, let's talk about his story. Kevin Costner was born on January 18, 1955, in Linwood, California, and grew up in Compton, a place that quietly shaped his toughness and resolve. He was the youngest of 3 boys, though his family had experienced early grief after losing one child at birth. His mother worked as a welfare caseworker, his father as an electrician who later moved into management. Raised in the Baptist church, faith and discipline became steady undercurrents in his life. Academics never truly captured him, but creativity did. He played football, learned piano, wrote poetry, and sang in his church choir. As a child, watching how the West was won ignited a fascination with storytelling and the American West that would later define much of his career. His teenage years were unsettled. His father's job forced the family to move repeatedly across California, leaving Costner struggling with confidence and constantly starting over. From marching band to baseball fields, he searched for belonging. He eventually graduated in 1973 and earned a degree from California State University, Fullerton, in 1978. Near the end of college, acting quietly entered his life. A chance meeting with Richard Burton on a flight home from his honeymoon proved pivotal. Burton's encouragement gave Costner the courage to pursue acting seriously. Although he briefly took a corporate job, it lasted just weeks. Nights were spent in acting classes, days in hard labor, driving trucks, working boats, and guiding Hollywood tours, building a dream step by step, fueled by persistence rather than certainty. Kevin Costner's acting career is a story of patience, risk, and late-blooming triumph. After years of small, often unnoticed roles in the early 1980s, he finally broke through with The Untouchables, where his quiet intensity set him apart. That momentum carried him into Bull Durham and Field of Dreams, films that transformed him into an unlikely leading man, restrained, thoughtful, and deeply human. The 1990s became his defining era. With Dances with Wolves, Costner didn't just star, he directed, reshaping the Western genre and earning sweeping acclaim. Films like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and The Bodyguard cemented his global stardom, balancing epic adventure with emotional restraint. At his peak, he embodied a certain American ideal, principled, flawed, and searching. Success, however, came with backlash. High-profile projects like Waterworld drew intense scrutiny, and Hollywood's favor cooled. Yet Costner endured, choosing persistence over retreat. He returned with quieter, character-driven roles, and later found renewed relevance on television. His portrayal of John Dutton in Yellowstone reintroduced him to a new generation, proving his screen presence had not faded, only matured. Across decades, Costner's career reflects something rare, not constant ascent, but survival. He never chased trends. Instead, he built a body of work rooted in endurance, legacy, and the long arc of storytelling, much like the characters he continues to bring to life. Away from movie sets and red carpets, Kevin Costner found another way to tell stories: through music. Encouraged by his then-wife, Christine, he stepped into the role of frontman for a country rock band he named Kevin Costner and Modern West. What began as a creative outlet soon turned into something far more serious. By 2007, the band was touring internationally, carrying their songs from American racetracks to stages in cities like Rome and Istanbul, places far removed from Hollywood's familiar glow. In 2008, they released their first album, Untold Truths, a fitting title for music rooted in reflection and quiet honesty. While the record found modest chart success, it was less about hits and more about expression. Singles were released, live performances filmed, and the band continued forward, undeterred by numbers. But the road was not without heartbreak. During a 2009 festival appearance in Canada, a sudden storm turned tragic when the stage collapsed, claiming a life and injuring many others. The moment left a deep scar. In response, Costner and the band turned grief into action, helping raise funds for the children left behind. Small gestures in the face of irreversible loss, yet filled with humanity. Music continued to follow Costner across borders and causes. A second album arrived in 2010, supported by another European tour, and later performances were tied to charitable events, blending art with purpose. His love for music even extended into film, appearing in a documentary celebrating the soul of country roads. Most recently, Costner returned to music through storytelling once again. Drawing inspiration from his role in Yellowstone, he wrote an album from the perspective of John Dutton himself, blurring the line between actor and character. The songs echoed through the series, a quiet reminder that for Costner, whether on screen or on stage, Every chapter has always been about telling a story.